It's great to have you here. My name's Glenn Hunberg. You're welcome to this talk on eternity. If you're looking for the eternity talks, you're at the right place, so welcome. Welcome to anyone who's checking us out on the webcast. If this is going to work, it doesn't want to go to the next slide. For some reason. Just go down like that. The city organisation putting this talk on is called the City Bible Forum, so welcome. We want to ask the bigger questions in the city, help people think about the meaning of life, the purpose of life, where they're headed, why they're going there. And for us, being a Christian organisation, at the very centre of that is Jesus. But we recognise people come into that idea or issue from all sorts of angles. Some people know nothing about him. Some people know lots about him. Some people know lots about Christianity, but it's been coloured by maybe a school experience, an institutional religious school, which is not always necessarily the best introduction to thinking about Christianity. So we want to explore those bigger questions in the city and life. I don't know if you noticed a few years ago, there was a thing in the bookshops and around the place of Vio called The Secret. Does anyone remember that thing called The Secret? Yeah, and the lady's name was Rhonda. Anyone remember her last name? Byrne? Was that it? And it was this idea that you could harness the power of the universe. The secret of life was that if you could just think positive thoughts, you could harness the positive power of the universe. So it was this kind of idea that the power in the universe is accessible to all. Classically, you might call it panentheism, that the spiritual is caught up in the whole fabric of the universe. And if you just were positive enough, you could attract good to you. Interestingly, a few years down the track, this lady was caught up in a major legal battle about the profits coming out of this company, which I think kind of slightly undermines this idea that if you just think positively, you can have it all. Because why couldn't you just solve that without going to court? So we're exploring just that kind of topic. Could this idea of life to come be the real secret of life? Could that help us live well now? How should it shape how we live now? Speaking for us is Ian Power. Come on up. Introduce Ian very briefly. Tell me why this is your favourite tie.
Well, it's actually my second favourite tie. One of the reasons is my wife found it in the second-hand shop and then went home and found how expensive it was. And I just think it's reasonably classy, that's all. And when you're not a classy guy, you've got to have a point of contrast. So
that's it. All right. And you're going to speak on the topic why does this topic of eternal life interest you? And I'm going to speak in a moment, but just why does it grab you?
Well, I think partly because, like many, I started for many years, and even after I've been a Christian for a while, with a misunderstanding. I thought it was about the quantity of life, where I think when Jesus speaks of it, it's first and foremost about a quality of life, which what we're going to look at today. It does have a quantity thing going, and an everlastingness. But often when Jesus speaks about it, it's really about a quality of life. So I find that fascinating, and I think because my reason for trying to avoid Christianity was because I thought it would seriously damage my quality of life.
Okay. Now, you're going to speak to us from one of the biographies about Jesus, the Gospel of John. Stay up here. I'm going to read out now. It's from John chapter 4. It's the context is Jesus is traveling through the land of Israel, and he meets a woman in a place called Samaria. So I'm just going to read that out briefly now. Now, Jesus had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came near to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water?" Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." Over to you.
Thank you. One of the things I like about being here with in Brisbane and being with Glenn is I'm never quite sure what question he's going to ask next. I wasn't ready to be asked about my tie.
It's just come up in conversation this morning a few times. I thought
yeah, I'm probably more vain than I think I am, really. But, well, I don't know what you think, just off the top of your head, would be the human body's strongest desire or need. If you're a post-Freudian, which all of us are, and you may well think it's sexual needs, which of course is nonsense. Sexual needs are very strong, and strong enough to destroy all sorts of lives at times and get us to make decisions that we often regret. But the most obvious one for us is thirst. It's a far, far, far stronger need and passion than sexual desire. The reason why many of us are not aware of that is we've never been really thirsty. You only become aware of strong desires and drives that humans have if you are deprived of them being met. So that there's a rule of 3s that some people trying to teach you how to live well in the outdoors suggest. You can go for 3 minutes without air, which is probably it's a stronger desire, but very rarely have we been choked nearly to death. But if you've had those moments underwater, perhaps smashed by a series of big waves, that desperate time when you can't breathe, you can go for roughly 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, I don't know, 3 months without a hug. I don't know what the other needs are, but the desire to drink, the need to drink, and so we express all sorts of longings and hopes that we have in terms of thirst, and it's a way of speaking that the Bible itself will often. There's so many computers here, aren't there? The Bible itself. I'm a little puzzled here. I'm a bear of little brain. I just need something. Thank you. Thank you very much. So in all sorts of languages, we use the idea of thirst or even hunger to speak of really serious needs. And Jesus himself will speak, and God in the Old Testament, before Jesus comes, will speak of thirst and water. And in the story that we've heard today, it's a wonderful story, and I wish we could spend more time on it. It's one of a number of stories in John's Gospel where Jesus meets women and treats them in a way that is fundamentally shocking to most cultures, not perhaps so much to ours now, but certainly, as you heard the woman herself said, how can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for drink? Because we have very few people in Australia are part of a community that has such a deep-seated hatred for another part of the community as there were between the Jews and the Samaritans. If I was a religious Jew and you were a Samaritan and your shadow went across the cup I was drinking water from, I would never use it again, even if it was crockery I'd inherited from my grandmother. I would burn it, smash it, and bury it. So filthy was considered the Samaritan's shadow. I mean, who can even understand thought like that? But that's how our fellow humans thought then. And so that she's shocked that Jesus would even talk with her, because she's not just a Samaritan; she's a Samaritan woman, and you can tell by the time she comes to get water, she's an outcast even amongst the Samaritans. So she's an outcast of outcasts, but Jesus has one of the most profound conversations he has with anyone in the Gospels. And she's the only person in John's Gospel that Jesus ever says, "I'm the Christ." Most of the time he won't. So it's one of the many conversations Jesus has with women that is quite shocking and wonderful in its own time. And what you see with Jesus when he meets, as you heard in the reading, was Jesus is hot and thirsty, and this woman is thirsty, and you meet these two thirsty people meet. He's weary, he's tired, we're told earlier on. His disciples have gone down to get some McDonald's to eat. He's waiting beside the well, but he doesn't have any, there's a rope but no jug or bucket. You have to bring your own. And this woman does that, comes in the middle of the day, when usually the women come morning and evenings when they come, unless you're an outcast. She's disorientated by Jesus' conversation with her and says, how can you even ask me for a drink? Jesus then moves, he's moving quite quickly in the conversation. And he says to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you the living water. So he says, lady, you're surprised at that? If you knew the gift, that God has a gift he wants to give you, a present, and if you knew who was talking to you, you would have asked the person who you don't know who he is, and he would have given you God's gift. So if you want God's gift, Jesus says, it's coming through the person who you don't know, who you found a bit surprising, but you don't really know who I am. She says, I don't know what you're talking about, you've got no bucket. And then he makes the comment, which Glenn read so well when he says this, everyone who drinks this water, pointing to the well, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I give, this is God's gift, it's the gift of water. Whoever drinks the water that I give will never thirst. Indeed, the water that I give will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Give me this water, she says. So Jesus engaged in a conversation with this lady about the two levels at which all of us exist as human beings. The level of physical water. There are various things human beings, our bodies need. We're made by God to be body creatures. It's one of the great things that God has done with us. And as a body creature, I have certain needs. I need to breathe. I need food. I need water. If I don't get enough of these things, or there's not sufficient quality in them, I will eventually break down and die. 3 days without water. But he contrasts that with this other level of human life, which also has needs. We could call it the soul, we could call it spiritual, we could call it, spiritual, psychological, whatever you call it. There's different phrases you can use for it. But it just acknowledges the fact that we're always operating at two levels. Looked yesterday at the way in which you can have success at 1,000, supreme levels and have no worries at all about food and water, and yet be so desperately unhappy that you are nearly or even really suicidal. That life is simply not worth living. Although physically all your needs are well and truly met. And Jesus is talking about that, and his claim is that he is the one who can give the water that will satisfy your deepest needs. And what are they? There's different ways of talking at them. One of the men that I read in my early 20s and find myself constantly coming back to is a psychologist from America. He must be retired now, if not dead. A guy called Lawrence Crabb, and he defines, he's done thousands of hours of counselling and many years of study, but he says he divides humans, our basic needs, into two sorts. He uses different categories for these, and these get picked up by other people without knowing it. Perhaps if you've read the works of Alain de Botton, who's sort of the resident popular psychiatrist for many people, he uses the same categories but uses his own words for them. Basically, humans need bread, we need food and water, and psychologically we've got these two other basic needs. We have needs for security and needs for significance. He fills that up by saying we need to know that we are loved. Human beings, even men, need to know that they are loved. And human beings, all of us, need to know that we are significant. Security and significance. And he says most of our needs and longings and frustrations and discontentments and crazy decisions are made trying to have these two needs met. We need to know that we are loved, and we need to know that we are important. Elsewhere he describes it as the need for intimacy, or the need to know that we are having impact in life. He says, and this is him, not me, so don't, although I think he's probably right, so you can have a go at me for it. He says, generally speaking, in America, where he did most of his work, if a human being has to decide between security or significance, generally speaking, a woman will choose for security, to know that she is loved, and a man will choose for significance, to know that he's important. It's why you get the classic marital breakdown between the workaholic husband and the wife who feels underloved, and they just drive each other apart in the end. Because they've got these two very essential needs. The bloke needs to feel he's okay at work, and he gets respect when he does his work well, and he comes home and his wife's feeling underloved, so she nags him. Didn't you make some promises about cherishing and things like that? And they just drive each other apart. It's these two very basic, deep needs we've got. Now, Jesus actually is claiming, when he claims to be the one who can give the water of life, contrasting it with the water that satisfies your physical needs, he is claiming to be the one who alone can truly and healthily meet your deepest psychological needs. We looked yesterday at the fact that it says that in the book of Ecclesiastes that God has put eternity in our hearts. It's not a coincidence. You're actually designed for a relationship with God. And if you lack relationship with the living and the true God, you can survive for a while, like a person lost at sea can survive for a while drinking salt water, but it will kill you fairly quickly. You can survive for a while on counterfeits that meet your need to feel loved or meet your need to feel significant for a time. But ultimately you'll feel and see your way through that. And Jesus says, I am the one who gives the water. I am the one. I am God's gift to you. It's a very large claim, isn't it? Imagine if I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad you're here. I've flown all the way out from Sydney because I am the one person who can meet all of your deepest needs. All of your deepest needs as a human being. I am the water of life. If you drink from me, you'll be satisfied. You'll have life in all its fullness. You would think, well, I knew those guys from Sydney were arrogant, but not that arrogant. I mean, but this is the claim Jesus makes, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but it's simply a claim that the Buddha never makes. It is simply a claim that Muhammad never makes. It is a claim that would never cross Moses' mind to make, or Zoroaster. No one claims, as Jesus does, to be not the one who can point you the way to a satisfying life, but to be the satisfying life. According to Jesus, if you have him, you have life. If you have him, you have only counterfeit life. And you will find other things to try and satisfy your needs. Viktor Frankl is a fascinating man, long dead. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, founder of the Third Viennese School of Psychiatry, and he was imprisoned by the Nazis. He was in Auschwitz for many years. And as a psychiatrist, he was interested in how people ticked, how people survived. What he noticed in Auschwitz, this horrible, unthinkable, it's not hell on earth, because there's no such thing as hell on earth, but it was as close as we get, I guess. He noticed that trainloads of men would come in, and great, big, strong, healthy men would come out, and small, puny, weaseling, sick-looking men would get out, and very often the big, strong men would die much faster than the weaselly and the sick. And what he began to talk with these men. And he discovered basically that if you came there with nothing more than you live for, than for pleasure and success and, you know, the next night out and owning a house in the right suburb in Berlin or whatever he said, you'd die almost within weeks. But if you had something deeper, richer, further, more important outside yourself that you live for, he said it might be God, it might be a loved one who you really loved, who was more important than your own life. He said with one guy, he'd come to a scientific breakthrough that he knew would really help mankind if he could survive. And it was living for something. He said, what he discovered was that more than man's search for bread and water, more important than surviving was having a sense of meaning and purpose. That something bigger and richer and deeper than yourself. Now, Australia is a culture that is from what's his name? The guy who wrote Lawrence, the English writer. No, not T.S. Eliot. I'm getting it. David D.H. Lawrence. Yes. D.H. Lawrence spent some time in Australia, wrote one of his books down south of Sydney, and he described Australian men as magnificent, vigorous, and something else, and hollow. He said that at the heart of most Australian men, he said there was nothing really there, and which means that when the pressure gets put on, we can be in all sorts of bother. And Frankl said this, he said, in a culture that has an absence of real meaning and significance and substance, he said, that vacuum will be filled with the pursuit of power and or pleasure. He said power, in its simplest terms, in the pursuit of money, pleasure, in its simplest terms, in the pursuit of sexuality. So he says a society that is obsessed with money and sexuality will be a society that is empty at the core and is desperately trying to find counterfeits to keep the system running. It's very hard not to think about our own culture at that point. What Jesus is saying is these very deep human needs are met by him. He is the water. He is the one person who can meet our deepest human needs. Our need for security, to know that we're loved. You will not find a love that comes close to the love that Jesus Christ has for you. I mean, I'm a very blessed man. I understand that my parents loved me and I was under no illusion that they didn't. I've had very good friends. I've got friends who I'm going to see next week that I've known since I was 4 or 5. I've had great friends I've picked up along the way. I'm a blessed man. I've got a wife who loves me. I've got kids who love me. I'm a really, I'm blessed. But no one loves me the way that Jesus does. Because no one knows what a jerk I am. No one knows how much of the things that I do that are quite nice have got really mixed motives going on. Sometimes you can do your loveliest act, and it's partly because you love the person that you're serving, and it's partly because you want them to love you. We're a muddle, and yet with Jesus, there's no uncertainty. He knows what I'm like. He's seen me at my very worst moments, and yet he loves me. He loves me enough to go to hell for me, to take my sin, even though it's against him. There's a beautiful part in a French church service, a French mass, that's on the Thursday night before Good Friday, when we celebrate the great love of God and Jesus, where they say in French, and for those of you who know French, I'm sorry to wreck the language, but they say something like this: L'amour de Dieu est une folie. L'amour de Dieu, you can probably work that out if you did schoolboy French. L'amour de Dieu, the love of God, est une folie. It is a foolishness. Now that statement is not a statement of blasphemy. It's not someone being rude. Right? It's someone who's lost in wonder, who says, it can't be that God, so great, so pure, so good, knowing me as he does, could love me to the amount that he himself would become what I am and take my place and go to hell. That is an absurd love. And until we've got some sense of, no, that can't be, can I seriously? We're probably yet to quite see it. But that experience, and it took me some years of being Christian before I kind of even began to get it. Victor Hugo wrote Les Miserables, which is a musical you really want to see, and the last movie is brilliant. He writes this: the supreme happiness in life is the conviction that you are loved for yourself. No. It is a conviction that you are loved in spite of yourself. I think Victor Hugo's right, because it's to know that I'm loved. I don't need to pretend with God. This is the lovely thing with God. I don't need to pretend, because he doesn't love me because he loves me, because he loves me, because he is love. That need to know that you're loved. Greg Louganis was a brilliant diver. Got famous at the Olympics in Australia because it was early on in the AIDS crisis, the HIV crisis, when he was the world's best diver by far. He made a mistake, which is rare, smashed his head on the board, I think it was, or on the platform, bled, and it came out. Some stupid journalist revealed that he was gay. So there was all this panic about blood and homosexuality and blah, 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 blah. And Greg Louganis, that's the first time I ever heard him, was this horrible scandal that was blown up around, which is unnecessary. But he was once asked, how can you stay calm when it's expected that you'll get 10 out of 10 all the time? Because he was so good for so long. And he said, before I go and take a dive, if I'm feeling particularly nervous, I remind myself whether I make this dive or not, my mother will still love me. And that's kind of cute. But what he's saying is, he just reminds himself in the end, the big questions are answered for him. Is he loved? Yes. And so this is what Jesus alone can bring us. This is the treasure that you stumble into when you become a Christian. I don't know how, if you are a Christian or not, but I became a Christian, as I shared, I think yesterday, quite reluctantly. Dragged into it because it was true. I didn't want to become a Christian. I thought it was the end of life. And slowly over the years discovered, my goodness, is that what God is like? I just thought he was real and inescapable and unavoidable and was at the end of my life as judge. But to discover that he is actually more loving than all the love I've ever drunk in my life is just wonderful. The love of God, it's a wonderful foolishness. And that also says to why you're significant. You don't die for the insignificant. You don't suffer for things that have no value to you. There are very few people I would die for. There's very few people I would hope I would die for. When none of us are as brave as we think we are. I would like to think that I would die for my 3 daughters. I think I would, but I just am aware that lots of men are not as brave at the crunch as they think they are. I'd like to think I'd die for my wife. I wouldn't die for Glenn. Much as I like the guy, You know, it just doesn't mean that much to me. But don't cry. But it's a question of what really matters to you. Who do you matter to? One of the scary things for consistent, courageous atheists is that they don't matter, and even their children ultimately don't matter. They say, yeah, but they matter to me. Yeah, but you don't matter. You only matter to things that don't matter, and that's why real courageous atheism, which is rare, is a very brave creed. It's very rare because people keep waffling on about things, but in the end, nothing matters. We're just all chemicals. But I know that I don't care if none of you think I matter. I matter to the one that matters. I really matter to the eternal God. I don't understand why. It's not as if I don't have some idea of how much vastly bigger he is than this tiny planet, and I'm just one of 7 billion. But part of the wonder of God is that although he is big and I'm small, he's still able to value the small. And he sends his son to die for me. The question of my significance is answered. It doesn't matter if the whole of my life is one dreadful failure after another. I matter to the one who matters. And Jesus alone answers that need. So what Jesus, when you begin to relate to Jesus, it brings you into a relationship with him, with a person who is water to your soul, because your deepest needs are really and truly met. You are loved and you are significant. And you remain that way because of his steadfastness. And so in the end, Jesus will turn to this woman and say, when she says, I want it, he says, go and get your husband. And she says, I have no husband. You may have heard it. Jesus very gently says to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. You've had 5. The man you're now living with is not your husband. Why does he do that? He's on the same topic. He's on the topic of water. Where has she been drinking from? Where has she been trying to find her deepest needs to be met? In men. What a hopeless failure that is. Right? And she's been through five marriages, and she or he has given up on the idea of marriage, and she's just living with a guy now. What Jesus is doing is he's really directing her to the puddle that she's been drinking from, and saying, leave the puddle, come to me. I'm the fountain of water, and I will meet and satisfy your deepest needs. Now Jesus does much, much more than that. He brings you into the knowledge of truth. We're going to look tomorrow that he solves the question, makes clear the question, and resolves the question of what happens in our quantity of life. But he leads us into a quality of life with him, where we are befriended by him and loved by him. Well, I've got a great quote here that I'll share with you some other time, perhaps, from an atheist who killed himself soon after making it, but just basically saying, we all worship something. We all give our lives to something. He said there's ultimately no real atheism. We worship either money or beauty or success. And he said it seems to him as if maybe God is the only thing that if you worship it, it won't actually kill you and turn you bitter in the end. So Jesus comes as the water of life. He has this conversation with a thirsty woman. I love the part where it says later on, she runs back to her village to tell people about Jesus, and she leaves her jar at the well. So she came to get water and is so excited about the water she's discovered that she's completely distracted and leaves the bucket back at the well as she goes to share with other people what she's discovered. He comes as water, he comes as light, and he finds us resistant, frightened. And we've learnt not to trust people deeply, and there's a strange distrust of God in our hearts. And yet he pursues us because he loves us. It's never ultimately us trying to find God, it's Jesus trying to find us, trying to get us to turn and face him. Let me finish with this true story. When the British outlawed slavery in England, it's very rarely happened that a country ends slavery. Lots of countries started. It's only happened once or twice in the whole of history that a country says no more. And to England's credit, they said no more. They also sent some ships down to patrol the west coast of Africa to try and stop all the slaves being dragged out by other nations. And the British Navy pursued a Portuguese ship that was full of hundreds and hundreds of slaves. You know how they loaded them up so horribly? It was a nightmare. And the British Navy ships chased this ship for about a day or so. They finally caught up to it. And when the Marines were coming across to take border, they discovered that there were a whole lot of Africans armed fighting them, because the Portuguese sailors had convinced the slaves that the people in the boat behind them were coming to kill them, that they were pirates. So the English, bless their socks, had actually come to release the slaves and to free them as saviours, and they found that because the slaves had been lied to, in order to ultimately release most of the slaves, they had to kill some of the slaves, because it was the only way they could get control of the boat. And when I read that, I thought, that's just a bit like the way that Jesus had to deal with me. He comes full of love and kindness, having died for us and hassling us to get us to face our thirst and deal with it healthily. And he finds that we fight against him because we don't realise his only intention is love. Big changes to our life that sometimes seem uncomfortable, but always and only because what he wants to be is water to our souls. So what is the key to the good life? Jesus says, I am the life, a couple of times. He says, I came that you may have life in its fullness. He says, I come to give you the gift from God. Well, any questions, statements, affirmations you might like to make? We've got a few minutes for questions, have we?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You're talking about the security and significance
Yeah.
of people wanting to know that they are loved or important. At the kind of critique level, I've made a couple of times about, I think, the illusion that you're secure or significant rather than actual significance.
The Christianity gives you an illusion of those things,
Yes.
because the whole thing's a delusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem with the psychological question is, I'm not suggesting someone that Christianity is true because it meets our deepest needs, although I think that's not irrelevant. If a view of life is claiming to be the explanation of reality, and it can't explain sensibly the deepest parts of being human, it's possibly wrong. This is one of the reasons why some people who I know have been atheists, and some high-ranking atheists, have moved, because they realise that their atheism makes no sense of human experience. That humans seem to have evolved by a series of chemical accidents and natural selection to a point where we believe all sorts of fantasies, and all the things that we know most about life, that love is the thing that matters. I mean, all humans, atheists, we all know that love is the people, the things that matter. But actually, within consistent, thoroughgoing atheism, nothing really matters, and your love for your child is just a chemical reaction. It's part of the selfishness of your DNA protecting your next line of DNA. And we think, really? Maybe. So I think my reason for believing that Christianity is true, and it's not a delusion, is because of the historical basis, particularly around the resurrection of Jesus. I know no one. No, I probably know one guy who has looked closely at the evidence for the resurrection and are not persuaded by it. They haven't all become Christians. My one friend who's done that has one of the silliest explanations for the resurrection I've ever heard, and we're meeting to talk about it on Friday morning. But again and again, when people look at the evidence for the resurrection, they find it deeply persuasive. That's why I believe it's true. It could be a delusion. Then again, I think atheism is a huge delusion. Atheism is a great protection of a sovereign. We've all got a God before we meet the living. I didn't need a God when I wasn't a Christian. I had a God, me. And I was doing a pretty good job, frankly, for an 18-year-old. Life was pretty easy back then. But none of us are morally neutral. Atheists are as defensive of their truth as religious people are of theirs. We've just got to realise we're all caught up in the defence. We believe things and we defend them. And it's hard for any of us to look honestly. But so yes, it could be that it's a delusion. But it's an interesting delusion because it actually accidentally, Christianity meets what we now know to be humans' deepest needs. So we didn't come up with this set of... Christianity wasn't preached as, are you lonely, are you blue, Jesus got something just right for you, take your cosmic aspirin and you'll be okay. You look at the way Christianity spread, it was spread by saying, a man lived, he died, he rose again, we saw him, this proves he's Lord of all. So it wasn't a psychological trip it was selling. We're doing 3 talks here, and one of them is about Jesus as the secret to true life. and eternal life is the thing that the human heart's looking for. Do you want to come back on that? It's a long, wobbly answer. Okay. I think Christianity, before any other question, I think what I noticed with my atheistic friends is that they criticize Christianity because it's too harsh and frightening and because it's too wonderful and loving. We talk about hell, they go, oh, how can you possibly believe that? Ooh, we can't believe that. That's obviously not true. That's cruel and nasty and frightens people. And then you talk about how wonderful it is that God loves you. They go, oh, you just believe that because that's nice and true. You know, you can't kind of win. I think the question is did he rise from the dead is the question. But this is the significance of it for human life. When you meet the living and the true God, he is almost too good to be true. And the last thing before it, there is nothing like this in any religion made up by man. There's no parallel to the love of God seen in the death of Jesus in Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Shintoism. Just not there. And that's not saying therefore it's true. I'm not saying that, or therefore it's better. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's just a fact that this is a peculiar view that Westerners tend to think all religions teach it, and they don't. Is that it, Glenn?
Yep.
Thank you.
Ian, thank you so much for speaking to us. Apart from shattering my sense of security and my sense of significance, it was a good talk. You'll be walking home. We'll be. If you're interested in finding out a bit more about what the City Bible Forum does, you can fill out this feedback card, and there's a box to tick down the bottom, and we'll collect your, whatever contact details you give, and be in touch with you. If something that Ian has said has sparked an interest in you in just pursuing this question more, this isn't a tick a box and suddenly you become a Christian or anything like that. But in that middle box where it says there, I would like to explore the topic of eternity further. That's an invitation for me to give you a call, send you an email, and tee up a coffee, and have a bit of a chat about what it is that you would like to explore further on this whole idea. Whether it be, Glenn, could you give me a copy of John's Gospel that Ian referred to in the story of the welcome? Could you point me in the direction of some historical information about Jesus and maybe a book or something to read? Or I'd like to just sit and chat and kick this idea around and ask you some questions. So, if you've got some things that you'd like to pursue, some questions coming out of this, you can tick that middle box. To fold them up, once you fill that out, just fold them in half, and Sue will come and collect them and just pass them into the centre if you feel happy to. There's no obligation to do that. One other thing coming up on Friday lunchtimes in the city at Ann Street, just down near King George Square, we're exploring over the next 4 weeks this idea of the God we don't believe in. What are the kind of things that would stop us from approaching this idea of the Christian God, his exclusiveness, or the existence of suffering, or what about the topic of science? So in the forthcoming Fridays, not all on the same Friday, those topics are separate Fridays, this idea of the God we don't believe in. You can see some more details, which week's got which topic, on the City Bible Forum website. Just Google City Bible Forum, pretty easy to find. Thanks so much for coming. It's been great to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah. Being made opportunity, and we're pretty much all looking at the mind already. But really just relationships.
Yes.
Good time. It always.